Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks also for the invitation to this very important conference here in Berlin. I'm very pleased to be part of it and to give some ideas to the very beginning of this conference. We are all economists, so what I will do, I will talk about the economics, not only because of climate change, but also in the energy system. And the time is right, I think, really to talk about a sustainable energy system. Now we have a recent discussion and a very important discussion about nuclear power, but this brings up all other technologies on the agenda, also on the policy agenda, and I think that's a good thing. Despite the fact that we have a lot of difficulties in the world about this, but nevertheless it brings politicians to think over their strategy. And this is why I would like to stress a few facts. And the first and foremost challenge we have to face is not primarily because we are facing difficulties on the energy system, but it's simply the fact fossil fuel is scarce. And fossil fuel, of course, is the most important energy source in the world. We have now, if we look on oil, for example, we see that we are facing an increase of oil supply in the next 10 years. By now, from starting 85 billion barrels a day up to 100 million barrels a day, which is a large increase of oil demand, simply by the fact that fast-growing economies in the Asian region is demanding more and more oil, and this brings also the price up, which we saw in the past. So the peak oil, this is where a lot of people talk about, we think will happen in 10 years from now, because there is a time where the global oil supply is meeting the maximum demand. And if we don't change, of course, oil demand will increase further. So global energy demand will double by 2050. This is fact. I mean, this is what we see because we have many, many fast-growing nations, and this is why the oil demand will also increase, especially if we look at countries like China and India. And from the economic point of view, of course, the investment in energy supply infrastructure is a large amount of investment, that's for sure, but these are investments in the markets, which are the future markets I will talk about later. And the International Energy Agency did some calculations, what is the amount of infrastructure investment. They say it's about $33 trillion which needs to be spent in the next 20 years in order to keep the energy system going. And this is not only infrastructure, but also the power sector, and here nuclear comes also in the debate, investment, of course, in new sustainable energy systems. Some further numbers, if we look at the International Energy Agency, they calculated recently the subsidies, and here the subsidies to fossil fuels, this is still $312 billion a year. This is the fossil fuel subsidies, and we have the support to renewable energy, in contrast, is about $57 billion a year. So we see still there's a large amount of money going into fossil fuel subsidies, and it would be a good idea to change the strategy and to promote the sustainable energy system and not the fossil fuel system. And they calculated also the cost of ending global energy poverty, which means, of course, many nations in the world have a very high energy poverty, and in order to change this, we need also further investments. The second challenge, and also the most important challenge to our opinion, is climate change. And if we look at the numbers, we see that there's a huge increase of emissions, of total emissions in the world, and we have different kind of ideas how to reduce. And here you see a recent graph, what kind of technology can contribute to a decrease of emissions, and here this is so-called a wedge strategy, where we have different kind of path and different kind of energy concepts. And of course, energy efficiency is a very important aspect. If we go on a business as usual path, then we will double greenhouse gas emissions. But we want to reduce. Energy efficiency is one part of it. Power use efficiency, transport efficiency, industrial fuel efficiency, and renewable energy, of course, is one aspect. Biofuel is a small fraction, especially we talked about in Germany a lot about biofuels, but it's a small fraction. Carbon capture and storage, where you capture the CO2 emissions and store it under the ground, is one option, which might be relevant in nations like China or the USA. We don't see so high options in Europe, and especially not in Germany. It's a very energy-intensive technology, it's inefficient, and it needs a lot of geographical circumstances which makes it possible to store it under the ground. So we are not that optimistic about CCS. So what we need is that we need a safe, climate-friendly and affordable energy system and mobility. This is a task. And the question is then, what are the economic consequences out of it? And the first question is, what is a green economy? And now we talked in the 20 years ago, we started from environmental protection technologies, environmental saving technologies. And now the question is, and I know that not many people like this definition, but what is a green technology? And I would say there are many different kind of definitions. The UNEP says a green economy can be defined as an economy that results in improved human well-being and reduce inequalities over a long term, while not exposing future generations to significant environmental risks and ecological scarcities. That's a definition from the UNEP, and they have recently reported what they understand out of it, and they screen the whole economies all over the world. It's very interesting to see what's happening here. So and the major sectors I think are relevant here, if we talk also and screen the economy, are of course renewable energy. This is the most important sector. We have low carbon transport, which is also very relevant. Energy efficiency, also buildings, of course, energy efficient buildings. Green technology. This could also cover CCS, as just discussed. Sustainable agriculture and forest management. Sustainable fisheries and improved waste and management. These are the sectors I would say this is a green economy, what we would also call, and which are more sectors than just environmental protection as it was defined before. So what are the market potentials? And we think the market potentials are huge because all different kind of nations have to find their ways towards a sustainable energy mobility system. And if we look, for example, we did a study for Germany where we assessed the energy efficiency improvements, the energy saving improvements, especially in buildings, like public and private financial incentives, the green mobility, also the policy to promote green mobility. That means also alternative fuels, but it could also be electromobility, and of course also combined heat and power, renewable energy, as I already said, and we have the sustainable mobility, which is much more than just reducing emissions. Electromobility could also be one very important sustainable mobility concept in cities, for example, because they reduce noise, they reduce emissions, they reduce particles, which improves the conditions and makes cities very attractive and increases the attractiveness. And of course the infrastructure is very important, smart grids, the infrastructure in order to increase the share of renewable energy and also for mobility, of course. So what we did for Germany, we did a study where we assessed the profit growth potentials, and they are huge. We see it, for example, by 2030, that sustainable mobility could increase German profit growth potential by almost 30%, which is a large amount, if the companies and also the policy will implement those right regulatory frameworks in order to really at the forefront of the market. And here also we have assessed the classical, what we call environmental sectors, like the recycling economy, like the resource and material efficiency, and also classical energy efficiency. And we think the growth potentials are huge, and we also see that the employment effects are large. We did a comparison to vehicle and machinery, and we see that the climate protection sector will increase drastically, and the job effects are tremendous, up to 1 million additional jobs in the next 10 years in these sectors just described. So is Germany a leader of the green economy in some sectors? Yes, I have a few examples. Here is the program which the countries spend in order to invest into out of the financial crisis in some sectors. And here we see the so-called green investments. We see that, for example, China spend a huge amount into such kind of sectors. But we have to be fair, we have to say that they also invested into infrastructure, where, in contrast to us, the infrastructure potentials are much higher. But you see that there is a large amount, and South Korea is the next region where the largest amount has been spent for the green fund, so to say, in percentage of GDP. And if we look at the ranking of the top 10 clean energy investment by sectors, we see that we have the top 10 clean energy investments in China. China is investing the largest amount in clean energy investment, followed by the USA. And of course also other European countries. Germany is on the 6th place. But we see, of course, that China, because they have, of course, a lot of huge capital options right now, because they're growing so fast that the opportunities are very high. And here we see the investment by sector. So where do they invest, especially in wind? And if we look at the 5-year plan, which I just have shown a few weeks ago, they want to create 70 gigawatt wind capacity, which is really a huge amount. This in 5 years. So we see this will continue. China will invest huge amounts of money in these markets, of course also USA. And the top market shares, if we want to assess whether the German firms are still there, this has been a bit, okay, this is a computer issue. If we look at 2008, of course there's wind manufacturers, like Vestas, of course, was place 1, is still place 1 and number 1 on the world scale, followed by the USA, GE Energy. Of course, we have also important wind companies in Germany, which lost the market share because Chinese companies are really strong. You see it here already that because China is investing, these firms are getting higher market shares, tremendous higher market shares, and German firms especially are reducing. And here the solar cells manufacturers is even stronger change, especially coming from the Chinese companies. The Chinese companies are very strong on this market, and they have increased market share tremendously. The German firms were part of it in 2008 and lost large market shares in comparison to Chinese firms. So big German firms still number 1 in climate protection. There's a recent ranking where they have screened 500 companies on the world and looked at the climate protection profile. And we found first 4 companies are coming, or which are leader on the climate protection market, are coming from Germany. And we see, not surprisingly, of course, Siemens here, but also Deutsche Post, and for me, surprisingly, chemical firms. But if you look at their program, you see, of course, that they are investing in energy efficiency, substitution to oil, and all different kind of technology for mobility, for energy efficiency. And this brings them the lead to the global ranking. And this is really interesting to see what kind of sectors they are leading in. And it's interesting that all four companies at the top of this list are coming from Germany. So briefly to the end, what needs to be done, of course, we need to do a lot. Here's a figure where we have to see that we have to look at the different phase of a technology. Where do we stand? At the very beginning, we start with the technology development. And I hear a lot of economists always saying we need more and more development. That's right, but not for those technologies which are already more mature. There we need other concepts, like, for example, financial incentives, like where we have to promote and also give, like, for example, in renewable energy feed-in tariffs, give credits and give then also options to close the gap. And then where the technology is coming out of the niche market and it's achieving competitiveness, as especially we can see in wind and solar, we need other other measures in order to promote, like which we see now in energy efficiency standards, information campaigns, and then the technology is there. And then the mass market is there. That's a question of time. But this is plenty at this stage to really ask for different kind of policy stages and policy recommendations, and not always one, which is not relevant for all different kind of technologies. And here, what needs to be done? We need energy saving improvements, especially for buildings. We need renewable energy promotion, as we see with the feed-in tariff system. The CHP options are very important. Pilot programs on renewable energy, sustainable mobility support. There also regulation is needed. And the infrastructure, of course, is very, very important, not only for the grid and also for the mobility concept, and of course information and cooperation. So between local authorities, companies, politicians, there needs to be a good also cooperation between all these different kind of actors. Climate protection is the economic driver of the future. The opportunities for growth are really immense. The gains will increase. This leads to a higher share of employment, and leading technology companies are winners. They are winners today and will be in the future, and they will gain more and more market shares, as we see already with renewable energy. So that's my final sentence. The markets belong to those who are aware of them. It's not hard to be green. Thank you.
I saw the CHP appearing on the screen. I'm wondering what it entails, what it is.
CHP is combined heat and power, where you have very efficient power plants. For example, if you use gas or also biomass, you can produce electricity and heat in combination. And in Germany, for example, we have a special law which should reach a share of 25% of CHP in, well, we should have reached it already, but there's no regulation which really supports it. And if we look at the future, for example, if we want to reduce, if we want to increase the share of renewable energy, then we have to look at more decentralized way of energy provision. And here also CHP, combined heat and power, is very interesting because it could also bring to a specific region the electricity which is needed, but also the energy for the building. So we use, for example, in Germany also gas combined heat and power systems. If gas is not too expensive, it's also an interesting option, but also biomass. And I think that's, from the efficiency point of view, really the best thing what we can do. But of course, purely from the economic point of view, a lot of companies just build coal power plants because they calculate it for a shorter time period.
You mean then, like, that it are all plants, the CHP, or that it's also like consumer directed, like
yeah, both.
Consumer?
I mean, both. Of course, we need always a range of different kind of options. CHP should be a larger share than we have right now. But of course, we need intelligent energy management program. We need also a renewable energy share, which needs to be increased. But it should be a combination in order to also fill the gap for renewable energy if there are volatilities, like when wind power is not available, when solar power is not available. We need to fill the gap. And CHP could be a very important option, especially if we look at the forecast, and a lot of people are living then in regions and urban areas, in cities, where CHP is the most advantaged technology I would recommend.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.